Hey, this is Josh from Grappazilla, and today we're going to talk about why Sambo is doing so well in MMA and why it's good for MMA. So let's talk about the types of Sambo. Basically, you have three types of Sambo. You have combat Sambo, which we'll be mainly discussing about this one, sports Sambo, and self-defense Sambo. We won't get into the history of Sambo because it's a very rich art with a deep history. Not in terms of age of years, but how it was developed, etc. is amazing. But the first reason, and the most important, you got to know this, is why Sambo is great for MMA, is because it's a multi-ranged combat system, meaning you got punches, you got kicking, you do have a type of gripping and middle range where you go throws and ground. It developed, and it's sport, right? It developed that the transitions between these ranges always ended up into immediate flow of attacks, okay? So what does this mean? Let's say take a guy who has jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. Because he's not training the jiu-jitsu and the Muay Thai together in one thing, unless he's training MMA, but we're talking about, let's say, big picture here. He doesn't ever get the transition of thinking, okay, now I'm non-jiu-jitsu, I go to Muay Thai, and now I go back to submission, etc. Now, jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai is very, very formidable, don't get me wrong. But Sambo still is winning championships. You know, we're seeing the domination with Fedor, which was back then smashing guys in the heavyweight division. And modern would be Khabib, and of course Islam. Makhachev, Islam just won his championship against Charles Oliveira. And the reason why, I believe, is because of the transitions between these ranges. So, for example, in Sambo, you start with kicking. There could be a takedown that comes, and they're ready for that. You punch. Actually, in combat Sambo, sometimes they have headbutts. And then they go into, for example, a throw or a takedown. And then they go immediately into striking or a submission or a pin, okay? Another reason that this is something to take into consideration is due to the fact that there's many competitions in wrestling, in Sambo, my bad. And because of this, from a young age, especially combat Sambo, students of Sambo get used to this use of, first of all, getting hit and using these ranges and transitional ranges in order to dominate their opponents. So let's say you're very good at kicking and punching. Well, you'd have to set up, and one guy's not, he's good at throwing. He would have to set up his throw off of a kick or a punch. And I think another thing that's very important with Sambo is the use of wrestling and how easy it is to add wrestling on top of Sambo. So, for example, you see Khabib and Islam and his whole gang go to train with DC in his gym. It's very easy for DC to add his wrestling on top of Sambo. And I think the big reason why is because there's so many influences in Sambo, such as Greco-Roman, freestyle, huge influence of judo, but more so, there's also a huge influence of cultural styles of the old Soviet Union, such as Georgian Chidaoba, Romanian Trenta, Armenian Koch, goulash from Azerbaijan, and a lot of Turkic wrestling styles that all have different grips and unorthodox rules that, when you took them, developed this style that basically from any grip, any situation, they always had something to go to. Another reason why wrestling is so easy to add to Sambo and why Sambo is so great for MMA is because they don't have pants. They wear shorts and they're allowed leg takedowns. Okay? And because of that, it's very easy to transfer that to an MMA background. There's also Chidaoba trips from Georgian Chidaoba, which actually many old school Sambo guys used to think they were much superior to those of judo. And we see these trips being used all the time in MMA. And trips are a huge thing in Sambo, right? Another thing that Sambo has is the takedowns into submissions, especially leg locks. There's no wasted time in a Sambo match because they could get stood up again. So when someone goes into a takedown, either they're going to go straight, to three things: a pin, they're going to go into a submission, or they're going to go into striking on the ground and finish it there, which all of these are great for an MMA fighter. You know, let's talk about the Chidaoba influence, because the Georgian Chidaoba has a huge influence on Sambo, as well as does judo and wrestling in terms of the grappling style. So why is Georgian Chidaoba so important? Is because Chidaoba itself is a wrestling style, a cultural wrestling style from Georgia, that they have a type of gi that doesn't have anything on the arms. So because of this, you had to use a lot of very weird grips behind the back, and also gripping the gi and maybe a hand, or attacking in certain unconventional ways, that when you took this to Sambo, and we actually saw this from the Russian judokas, when they were allowing a lot of the leg takedowns, Russians were very, very good at judo, because they use a lot of Sambo grips there that the Japanese and judokas weren't used to. Now, you ask yourself, how does this influence MMA? There's no gi. It's a good question. The reason it influences it is because Sambo, those movements from the weird grips, such as like the Khabib, which is a grip that a judoka from judo named Khabib used to win the Olympic gold. All these grips of coming on top, like lacing your leg around and throwing, we do see somewhat in Khabib's movement, right? Of course, there isn't a grip or there's, but it's always in a movement. Maybe a guy's attacking, Khabib maybe reverses it, etc. And a lot of Samboists do that as well. And I think that has to be taken, is that use of the body position is there. So just adapting it to MMA or no gi is much easier. And it's going to be unorthodox, so a lot of guys don't see it. Another one that's a little bit controversial, I guess, would be the pinning, right? I mean, there's no doubt that on the ground, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the most dominant that we've seen, okay? And in fact, its dominance has led to its not being even, I'm not saying useful, but it kind of cancels it out because everyone does it. Now, if you don't do Jiu-Jitsu, you might have a problem, right? And even a lot of the Sambo guys, they're all training Jiu-Jitsu too when they're going to MMA. But pinning from Sambo is a very interesting thing, okay? Because it enables an emphasis on attaining top game or getting out from under a pin. So you're always getting back onto top. You look at the bottom as a problematic position. When you put this into modern MMA's rules, it's fantastic because you look more dominant. You get on top. It's much easier to strike, ground and pound. And overall, it's a better place to be. Look at most of the matches out there. You want to be on top, right? Now, does that mean that you shouldn't use guard, as you see in BJJ? No, you should of course use guard, and she should learn it. But you should understand why Sambo guys are dominating. One of the things I think is because of pinning, because they understand the hierarchical prevalence of being on top and not being on bottom, and they'll do whatever they can to get there. Once again, if we could look back to transitions, a Sambo 3 would generally go into a position that you'd be on top game and a pin. You understand? So let's say you pin someone in Kezakatami, scarf hold, or into a side control. All of a sudden they're there for ground and pound, etc. Now another thing we need to talk about is combat Sambo striking. While it's not the level of, let's say, a high-level Muay Thai or a Dutch kickboxer or a boxer from Philly, the difference is that Sambo's striking is always prepared for a throw or a takedown. And that, once again, we'll talk about the transition. Once they get into an MMA gym, there is no like, oh wow, but my stance was too high, or my weight was too much on my back foot in order to have the teep for Muay Thai. They're ready for that takedown to come or that throw. And that's great to transition to MMA. Another thing is Sambo also has submissions. They're very quick, okay? Generally you could say, I might get some heat for this. In comparison to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they are a little bit less refined, and I would say more gross motor movement, but very effective, okay? And they're always concerned with striking and pinning, especially in combat Sambo. And last, let's talk about something that is a little bit, how would I say this? A weird, like, situation. Sorry, my English. The guard. So until recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, crossing ankles in close guard wasn't allowed. It was not allowed in Sambo. Now recently it has been allowed. And also, there aren't so many submissions from the guard in Sambo as you would see in Jiu-Jitsu, which is a very dominant guard game, right? But there is also a reason why. Because let's say I take you into guard, okay? Now, while you're attacking, I could actually pin you, right? Also in half guard. And because of that, once again, I always try to get in top position when that position gets out. And if someone's in guard, they're trying to get out if they can. Even maybe more than submit, which is great also for MMA. You definitely, if we look at the amount of people trying to get up and out from guard, especially at the heavyweight level, it's very hard to hold someone down, right? Like imagine trying to hold on like a big boy like that down. So that's one thing. Now, it is an advantage and a disadvantage because the attacks aren't the same from the guard. No way is similar to BJJ. But the advantage is that you understanding positioning, and once that positioning goes to transitioning. Okay, so where does Sambo really differ from other arts? If we get to three things. The first is it's a transition martial art. What does that mean? All the arts together, like all the ranges, aren't just emphasized on the ranges itself, but how to transition from one another in order to beat each other. Number two, it's competitive. So there's a lot of hours of actual getting hit. Whatever works does. You keep whatever doesn't work, you don't keep. And the third, the influence of wrestling and mid-Asian and Turkic wrestling styles into Sambo makes it very easy to add, if they even need, wrestling and throws into their MMA game. And I believe this is why we're seeing fighters like Khabib and Islam dominate. I mean, there is obviously the fact that they're from Dagestan, and Dagestan is the mecca of wrestling. But they are Sambo guys, and they are Judo guys, and they are dominating. So we must ask why, and I believe these are the reasons why.